Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to give you that shortcut to, well, really understanding complex topics.
And today we're jumping into something truly fascinating, the work of Peter Levine.
Right, specifically this idea he has, which feels almost counterintuitive, that healing trauma isn't just about thinking our way out of it.
Exactly. It's about our bodies, our instincts. We're looking at somatic experiencing, or SE. And it all starts with this core question Levine asked.
The one about animals.
Yeah. Why can wild animals face constant life or death situations, predators and all that, but they rarely seem traumatized? They just complete the cycle.
Which is where we, humans, seem to stumble. So our mission today, it's not about seeing PTSD as just another disorder in the book, right?
Not at all. We're shifting the view, seeing it as a natural biological process that's just gone off track somehow, something stuck.
That animal observation, the trauma paradox, it really hits home. Because if survival responses are built in, why do they fail us? Why does it cause so much suffering for humans?
And the scale of that suffering is, well, it's why this is so important to talk about. Trauma isn't some edge case. It's incredibly widespread.
You see these stats like, 40% of people have had some major traumatic event pretty recently, in just the last few years.
That's one figure, yeah. 40% in the past 3 years. And remember, that's just reported. It's a huge part of our shared reality right now.
And then there are the deeper, maybe more hidden layers, like the stats on childhood abuse. I saw figures between 75 and 100 million Americans.
Yeah.
It's staggering.
It is. Or domestic violence, maybe up to 30% of married women experiencing physical abuse. It shows trauma isn't just about, say, war zones or big disasters. It can be happening right now in seemingly normal lives.
And this connects to something else, doesn't it? The physical symptoms that doctors often can't explain.
Oh, absolutely. That's maybe the most compelling clue, that this is physical, that it's in the body. You hear numbers like up to 75% of people going to their doctor have complaints, pain, stomach issues, headaches.
And there's no clear medical cause found.
Right, so they get labeled psychosomatic. But what Levine's work suggests, and what more people are realizing, is that these are often the body still signaling danger from past trauma. The energy never got released.
So, okay, if it is trapped energy, physiologically stuck, then the way out has to involve the body too. We need to get back into that system somehow.
That's the core insight. We have to access what Levine calls the body's wisdom. It's innate instinctual knowledge.
Moving beyond just the story we tell ourselves about what happened.
Exactly. It's less about the narrative and more about the direct felt experience. Healing means reconnecting with that living, feeling organism. Listening to what the body itself is saying through sensations. We need to learn that language again.
Okay, let's dig into that mechanism. How does this energy actually get stuck? What does incomplete mobilization really mean in the body?
Well, it starts simply enough. You face a threat, right? Instantly, your nervous system shifts gears. Huge energy surge.
That's the fight or flight response kicking in.
Right. Sympathetic nervous system floods you with adrenaline, cortisol, all the juice you need to either fight off the danger or run like hell. Your body is primed for massive action.
And in the wild, that action usually happens. The gazelle escapes. Maybe it shakes violently afterwards.
Exactly. That shaking, the trembling, that's the discharge. It burns off the excess energy. The fight ends. One animal retreats. The energy is spent. The system completes the cycle and resets. It gets the signal, okay, danger's over. You're safe now.
But trauma happens when that cycle gets interrupted.
Precisely. The mobilization happens, the gas pedal is slammed to the floor, but the action, fighting or fleeing, is blocked. Maybe you're physically held down. Maybe it's a situation where fighting back is impossible or too dangerous. Maybe the threat is just overwhelming.
So all that intense survival energy is generated.
But it has nowhere to go. It gets locked, trapped, inside the nervous system, frozen mid-response.
And that's what creates this vicious cycle, this hyperarousal state.
Because if your body is still buzzing with all that undischarged fight-or-flight energy, what does the organism conclude?
That it must still be in danger.
Exactly. The internal state itself becomes the ongoing danger signal. Your muscles are tight, your heart's racing, your breathing is shallow, your senses are on high alert. All that feeds back to your brainstem saying, still not safe, stay ready.
Which just ramps up the system even more.
Right, it becomes this self-perpetuating loop. More readiness signals danger, which triggers more readiness. It just keeps amplifying itself. And that chronic overload leads to all those debilitating symptoms we associate with trauma. The constant vigilance, the panic attacks out of nowhere, the anxiety.
So why don't animals get stuck like this as often? They freeze too, right?
Yeah.
What's the human difference?
That's the paradox. Animals do freeze. When fight or flight isn't an option, the system often defaults to immobilization. Playing dead, it's another survival strategy.
But they seem to come out of it. They do the shaking thing.
Yes. For them, it's just another stage in the biological process. But for humans, well, we have this big, complicated brain, our neocortex.
We think about it.
We think about it, and we interpret the feeling of being immobile. And what does total immobility, helplessness feel like to a human?
Like death, like giving up, annihilation.
Precisely. It feels like death, disintegration, utter powerlessness. And we have a profound, deep-seated fear of that feeling.
So our fear prevents the natural completion of the freeze response.
That seems to be the core issue. Animals flow through it. Humans resist that feeling of collapse with everything we've got. Intellectually, culturally, we fight against that sensation of breakdown, so we end up holding the system rigid, stuck in that high-energy state or that frozen state, preventing the natural discharge that needs to happen. We're caught between the biological imperative and our conscious fear.
It's fascinating. This even connects back to early psychoanalytic ideas, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like Freud.
It really does. When Freud was trying to understand shell shock, what we now call PTSD, in soldiers after World War I, he realized his existing theories weren't enough.
His focus on the pleasure principle, the drive to live and seek pleasure eros.
Right. That couldn't explain why people kept reliving these horrible experiences, why they seemed compelled to repeat the trauma in nightmares or flashbacks. It wasn't pleasurable at all.
So he introduced the counter idea, the death drive, thanatos.
Not necessarily a conscious wish to die, but this more fundamental pull towards stillness, towards an inorganic state. A drive to break down, to simplify. And you can see the unresolved trauma state, especially that held freeze, as this intense internal battle.
Between the life force, eros, wanting to preserve and connect.
And this pull towards dissolution, thanatos, reflected in the feeling of collapse that the freeze state embodies. Our conscious fear of that feeling keeps us locked in the struggle, unable to just let the biological process complete and reset itself.
Okay, so if we want to help the system reset, we need a better map of how it works. And that brings us to Stephen Porges and his polyvagal theory.
Yes, polyvagal theory gives us a much more nuanced map than the old simple on-off switch of sympathetic versus parasympathetic. It's really elegant.
It's based on evolution, right? Different layers developed over time.
Exactly. Porges describes 3 distinct neural circuits within the autonomic nervous system, arranged in a hierarchy based on when they evolved, and they respond to challenges in a specific, predictable order.
So let's start with the newest one. The mammalian one.
Right, the newest circuit is the myelinated vagus. This is unique to mammals. It's often called the social engagement system.
And social engagement. So it's about connection.
Yes, it's the system that allows us to feel safe enough to connect with others. It regulates calm states, supports health, growth, digestion, all those rest and digest functions. But crucially, it also controls things like facial expressions, vocal tone, listening the things we need for social interaction.
And it acts like a brake.
A very sophisticated brake. Porges calls it the vagal brake. It can actively calm the heart rate and, importantly, inhibit the older, more primitive defense systems below it. When this system is strong and online, we feel safe, connected, and resilient. High vagal tone means you can self-regulate effectively.
Okay, so what happens if the threat feels too big for that system to handle?
Then we drop down the evolutionary ladder to the next circuit, the sympathetic nervous system.
The familiar one, fight or flight.
That's it, the accelerator. Mobilizes energy, gets the heart pumping, sends blood to the muscles, shuts down non-essentials. Highly effective for dealing with immediate danger, but really draining if it stays activated long-term.
And if that doesn't work, if you can't fight or run, and the threat is overwhelming,
then the system defaults to the oldest circuit of all, the unmyelinated vagus, sometimes called the dorsal vagal complex or the reptilian circuit.
this is the freeze response.
This is the deep immobilization. It's a shutdown, a dramatic conservation of resources. Think of an animal playing dead. Physiologically, it involves a sharp drop in heart rate, blood pressure, muscle tone. It can lead to fainting, dissociation, a feeling of being disconnected. It's the system basically saying, survival chances are minimal, conserve everything.
So chronic trauma often means being stuck cycling
Between that high anxiety sympathetic activation and the collapsed, shut down dorsal vagal state, the system loses its ability to flexibly return to the safe, socially engaged state mediated by the myelinated vagus.
And how does the body know which circuit to activate? It happens automatically, right?
Yes, through a process Porges termed neuroception. It's brilliant.
Neuroception, like perception but happening below consciousness.
Exactly. It's your nervous system constantly scanning the environment and, crucially, your internal environment for cues of safety or danger. It happens subcortically without conscious thought. It's constantly asking, safe, dangerous, life-threatening. And based on that split-second assessment, it triggers the appropriate circuit.
Okay, internal environment. That feels key. This brings us back to the body's feedback loop. Interoception.
Absolutely critical. We tend to think of the vagus nerve sending signals out from the brain to the organs, but it's mostly the other way around.
Really?
Yeah, something like 80% of the fibers in the vagus nerve are afferent, sensory fibers. They're sending information up from your organs, your heart, your lungs, your gut to your brainstem.
So our gut feelings are literally gut feelings. Signals going up the vagus nerve.
Pretty much. This is the physical basis for the felt sense. It's a constant stream of information about your internal state.
And that internal state directly influences which polyvagal circuit gets activated.
Profoundly. It's a two-way street. If your heart is pounding, your stomach is churning, your breathing is restricted, those signals travel up the vagus nerve. Your neuroception picks up on that internal danger signal, and it can trigger a defensive response, sympathetic or dorsal vagal, even if the external environment is perfectly safe.
Which explains why just talking about trauma might not be enough. You can understand intellectually that you're safe now.
But if your internal interoceptive signals are still screaming threat, your nervous system won't believe it. It stays locked in defense mode. Somatic experiencing aims to directly work with those physical sensations, that interoceptive feedback, to help the nervous system finally get the message that the danger has passed and it's safe to stand down, to re-engage that myelinated vagal brake.
So if SE is about resolving that trapped energy, completing the cycle,
Yeah.
how does it actually do that? It's not about just reliving the trauma, right?
No, definitely not about flooding the system. That can be re-traumatizing. The key principle in SE is titration.
Titration, like in chemistry,
Yeah.
adding things drop by drop.
Exactly like that. You're dealing with very potent stored survival energy. So the idea is to gently, carefully access just a tiny bit of that arousal, that activation related to the trauma.
Just enough to feel it, but not be overwhelmed.
Right. And then, crucially, you immediately support the system in finding ways to discharge that little bit of energy, allowing the natural release mechanisms to kick in, but in a manageable way.
And the attitude is key here, isn't it? Levine emphasizes being gentle.
Immensely important. His phrase, go slower to get there faster, is fundamental. This isn't about pushing through or forcing anything. It's about patience, curiosity, coaxing the nervous system back into regulation, not shocking it.
And how do you coax it? How do you access that energy safely?
Through the felt sense. That's the doorway.
Okay, we mentioned the felt sense, the body's language. What does that mean in practice? What are you looking for?
It's about tuning in to the subtle, nonverbal, non-cognitive stream of information coming from your body. It's not just emotions or thoughts, but raw physical sensations.
Like
Heat, coolness, tingling, buzzing, vibrations, a sense of expansion or contraction, maybe subtle muscle twitches or shifts in posture, changes in breathing. It can also include images or words that pop up, but the core is the direct physical sensation.
and the approach is just observing these things.
Observing with gentle, open curiosity. Like a scientist watching an interesting phenomenon, you just notice that, there's a feeling of warmth in my chest, or, my shoulders feel tight, without judging it, without needing to understand why it's there, without getting swept away by any emotion attached to it. Just take it as it comes.
And this noticing, this awareness is what helps.
It's the crucial human ingredient, our capacity for conscious awareness. Animals react instinctively. We can observe our internal state. And by slowing down and consciously attending to these sensations...
You're doing the opposite of the fast automatic trauma response.
Exactly. Trauma response is fast, high arousal, automatic. Healing happens slowly, with low arousal, deliberately. This slowing down creates space. It allows for what Levine calls renegotiation.
Renegotiation, like revisiting the event differently.
Not necessarily the event story, but the physical response. By consciously tracking the sensations associated with the trapped energy, you allow the body, in tiny increments, to complete the defensive actions it couldn't complete at the time. Maybe a subtle sense of pushing away, or tremors, or a feeling of running in the legs, or just a deep breath of relief.
So the discharge happens through awareness and sensation, not necessarily big physical actions.
Right. The gentle, mindful tracking and allowing of these sensations allows the energy to discharge just as effectively as if the animal actually ran or fought. It completes the cycle physiologically, it releases the pressure.
And there's research that supports this idea of discharge through expression, even outside of SE.
Oh yeah, definitely. There are studies, for example, looking at what happens when people talk or write in detail about really difficult traumatic experiences.
What did they find?
Well, during the act of confessing or writing, their physiological measures, heart rate, blood pressure, shot way up. They were clearly re-engaging with that high arousal state.
Which sounds stressful.
It is, momentarily. But here's the key finding. Weeks later, like 6 weeks after that intense expression, their baseline arousal levels, the same measures like heart rate and blood pressure, were significantly lower than before they did the writing or talking.
Wow. So the temporary stress of expressing it led to long-term calm.
Exactly. It demonstrates that allowing that stored activation to come forward to be expressed and experienced consciously actually facilitates the necessary physiological discharge. It helps the nervous system finally recalibrate from danger back towards safety. It's not just feeling better emotionally, it's a measurable shift in the body's baseline state.
Now let's talk about thinking. When your nervous system is stuck in high alert, it must affect how you process the world cognitively, too.
Oh, profoundly.
Yep.
One key function that gets impaired is the orienting response.
The orienting response. That's like noticing something new.
Yeah, the great Russian physiologist Pavlov called it the что это такое reflex. Literally, what is that, or what's going on here? It's that basic, instinctual flicker of attention and curiosity when something changes in your environment. It helps you scan, assess, and take in new information.
So what happens to it in trauma?
In someone who's chronically hypervigilant, that natural curiosity gets overridden by the defense system. Instead of orienting to a new sound or situation with, what's that? The default response is it a threat? The system jumps immediately to defense, to freezing or scanning for danger.
So it's hard to take in new neutral information.
Very hard. The brain is too busy prioritizing potential threats to properly assimilate neutral or complex information. This leads to that feeling of confusion, being easily overwhelmed, having trouble focusing or learning. Simple things like following directions or being in a busy place can feel like information overload because the orienting response isn't functioning properly to filter and sort stimuli. It impacts everything, not just obvious danger situations.
And memory itself.
Yeah.
How trauma gets stored is different too, right? It's not like a clear video recording.
Not at all. Levine describes trauma memory as a mixed bag.
A mixed bag, meaning?
Meaning it's not stored as a neat linear story. It's stored as fragments, maybe a sensory snapshot, an image, a strong emotion, a physical sensation like tightness or nausea, a motor impulse like wanting to run, all clustered together because they share the same high-intensity arousal level from the original event.
So the feeling, the intensity is what links these fragments.
Yes. And because that arousal is so powerful, the organism tends to interpret any element within that cluster, the image, the feeling, the sensation, as the cause or the truth of the memory. The intensity lends it a feeling of absolute reality.
This sounds like it has really important implications for therapy.
Huge implications.
Yeah.
Because the traumatized system is already in a state of high arousal and searching for answers for the cause of the distress.
Right.
So if you use therapeutic techniques that deliberately crank up the emotional intensity or arousal without careful titration and grounding,
You risk the brain grabbing onto whatever intense feelings or images surface and labeling them as the memory.
exactly, there's a real danger of creating false memories. The intense arousal can generate powerful experiential collages, bits and pieces of sensation, emotion, maybe unrelated images that feel incredibly real and get mistaken for accurate historical memories simply because they carry that overwhelming charge. The feeling is authentic, but the narrative constructed around it might not be historically accurate.
So if we're talking about healing through SE, the goal isn't necessarily to reconstruct an accurate timeline of what happened.
No, the focus shifts completely. True healing in this model has very little to do with memory accuracy. It's not about verifying the historical details.
And what is it about then?
It's about discharging that unresolved physiological activation. It's about releasing the energy trapped in the nervous system. The real goal is restoring flexibility and spontaneity to the organism.
Getting unstuck.
Getting unstuck. Trauma keeps you locked in rigid defensive patterns, often compelling reenactments of the past. Healing resolves that underlying physiological conflict, freeing you up to respond to the present moment in new, more adaptive ways. It's about reclaiming physiological freedom, not achieving historical certainty.
So we've covered a lot of ground. From that initial puzzle about animals, through the mechanics of trapped energy, the neurobiology with polyvagal theory, and into the actual practice of somatic experiencing.
Accessing the felt sense, titration, renegotiation.
It all seems to point back to this really powerful idea. Healing trauma is fundamentally about reconnecting with our body's own innate intelligence, our instincts.
It really is. It feels radical in a way, but also incredibly simple. Instead of trying to think our way out or talk our way out of a problem that's fundamentally held in our physiology.
We need to learn to listen to the body itself, to work with those internal feedback signals, the interoception.
And gently, consciously, allow that trapped survival energy to finally complete its cycle and resolve.
You know, thinking about the self, our identity, we often think of it as our story, our memories, our conscious thoughts. But what happens when those cognitive parts fail?
That's a fascinating question. It brings to mind some of the work by the neurologist Oliver Sacks. Remember his patient, Dr. P?
The man who mistook his wife for a hat.
That's the one. Dr. P had lost his ability to recognize faces, objects. His visual world had become, as Sacks put it, a collection of lifeless abstractions. His cognitive ability to connect what he saw with meaning was severely damaged.
Yet he could still function in some ways, couldn't he? Especially with music.
Amazingly well. He was a musician, and Sacks observed that Dr. P's ability to move, to act fluently, even to recognize people sometimes, seemed tied to what Sacks called his body music.
Body music.
Yeah. Dr. P might not recognize a student sitting still, but if the student moved, he'd say, ah, that's Paul. He recognized their characteristic movements, their physical rhythm, their body music. He'd lost the conscious body image, but retained this deep, non-cognitive sense of flow and action.
So how does that connect back to trauma and SE?
Well, Sacks described Dr. P's musicality, his fluent action when immersed in music, as being like pure will. It was this unstoppable flow of self, bypassing his broken cognitive systems. It offers this incredible metaphor. If our true self, our identity, isn't just our conscious story, but also this continuous, flowing, non-cognitive narrative of the body,
This body music.
then maybe trauma is what happens when that music gets silenced or stuck, locked into rigid defensive patterns, the flow stops.
And healing through something like somatic experiencing.
Right.
By resolving that deep visceral conflict.
It's like restoring that flow, restoring the integrity of that interoceptive feedback, letting the survival cycle complete. It goes beyond just managing symptoms.
It's about reclaiming that inherent will, that capacity for spontaneous, flexible, embodied life.
Yeah.
Getting the music playing again.
Exactly. That feels like the ultimate self-possession, the real reward of, well, waking the tiger within.
A powerful place to leave it. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.
Always a pleasure. We'll see you next time.